March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 souls vanishes without a trace over the Indian Ocean. The largest search in aviation history fails to find any meaningful evidence. What happened to this ill-fated flight? Did the captain commit suicide by airplane? Was it a terrorist attack? Aliens? Let's find out in this week's episode, the mysterious disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
It's the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. We are your hosts, Agent ETA,
Agent Locke,
Agent Orange,
and Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFOs, conspiracies, and all things strange. Follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod. Our email is alienconpod@protonmail.com. Send us your stories, comments, and questions. We would love to hear from you. All right, first order of business, we'd like to introduce our new agent, Agent Orange. Welcome to the show, Agent Orange.
Welcome.
hey, what's up?
All right. So now, yeah, that's your introduction. Sweet. Okay.
Yeah, that's what you get.
Yeah, there you go. All right. First, it's time for Strange Events, Bizarre Facts, the Unbelievable Revealed. This is the Mind Boggle of the Week. Okay, so I was listening to a podcast earlier today, a Monday morning podcast with Bill Burr, and at the end of the show there, he had people writing him letters and stuff. And the mind boggle this week is, so people are sending him relationship questions. Wrap your head around this. People are asking Bill Burr for relationship advice. And at this moment, when I started to sink into me what was happening here, I started to understand this crazy world we live in just a little bit better. Okay, and that's the mind boggle this week, I guess. Also, another order of business this week is we are recording on the 4th of July. You know, hey, Ray, America. So you may hear some loud noises in the background. Don't worry, it's not the apocalypse. We're not being shot down. It's not a Western gunfight. It's just the 4th of July. Okay. And now let's get on to the episode topic show, MH370. So the basic timeline. On March 8, 2014, Flight 370 was flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. It was a Boeing 777, and it made the last contact with air traffic control at about 1:19 in the morning at local time over the South China Sea. This was about an hour after takeoff. And then shortly after that, a few minutes later at 1:22 in the morning, it disappeared from radar. It was, or from the flight tower, or from the airport radar. They were still tracked on military radar, however. The flight path of the airplane deviated from where it was supposed to be going, and it crossed over the Malay Peninsula. It left military radar at about 2:22 in the morning over the Andaman Sea. The flight path looked a little unusual. It's kind of like it might be uncontrolled or erratic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, about what that could mean, but I won't go too much over that right now. Following its disappearance, there was the largest multinational search ever in the history of aviation. It was by far the most extensive and expensive. At some point, they just gave up and ran out of money. But they searched the Gulf of Thailand, the South China Sea, the Strait of Malacca, the Andaman Sea, and the South Indian Ocean. The plane communicated through the Inmarsat satellite network, and that's like a network that the plane uses to kind of transmit maintenance or technical data to Boeing, so that if something's going wrong on the plane, or maybe, you know, people are getting too many hemorrhoids from sitting on their hard-ass seats or whatever, it'll transmit that data to Boeing and they can take care of whatever the problem is. So it transmitted to that satellite network is the last thing that they got. And they were able to analyze some of these transmissions to find out where the plane was most likely to have ended up. And they think that it went into the South Indian Ocean, and it was in the air until at least 8:19 in the morning. And they think that it kind of just flew until it ran out of fuel. But based on this data, they were not able to determine its exact location or where it landed. It's possible that its flight path turned south after going past Sumatra, and it just kind of crashed somewhere, who knows, in the middle of the ocean. And where they think it crashed was pretty far from any possible landing sites. So based on its flight path, it seems unlikely that it would have landed somewhere, maybe if they had somehow gotten back control of the airplane or fixed whatever was going wrong. But maybe not. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We have one of our agents is hot on the case for that one. All right. So the search effort went from October 2014 to January 2017. So they were searching for this thing for a really long time. And they searched about 120,000 square kilometers, which is about 40,000 square feet of the ocean and the seafloor. And they also about 1,800 kilometers or 1,100 miles southwest of Perth. That's in Western Australia. And they weren't able to really find anything. Finally, in 2015, on July 29th, they found a couple pieces of the airplane washed up on the coast of Africa. That's the first pieces, and a couple other pieces washed up in some other places. Maybe we'll touch on that later. I'm not sure if anybody is hot on that particular case, but we might bring it up again later about those pieces because it's pretty important. Yeah. Malaysia did an official investigation on this, and they released the report in October 2017. A couple of highlights from the report was that the plane didn't send any distress signals of any kind. There was no indication of bad weather. It didn't appear that the plane suffered from any technical or mechanical problems before it disappeared. 2 passengers were on the plane with stolen passports, but after investigation, they were ruled out as suspects for any shenanigans because they appeared to be asylum seekers from Iran. But they were from Iran, so you never know. Who knows? But they don't appear to have been the people to cause this, if anybody did. If anybody did cause this, if it was due to human intervention of some kind, the most likely suspect is the captain of the airplane. But again, that's pretty inconclusive. But they named him as the prime suspect if anybody did anything. Let's see. This was the second deadliest incident involving a 777 and Malaysia Airlines as well. So for both of those are Malaysia Airlines holds that record. The first one was actually Flight 17, also Malaysia Airlines, with 298 dead people on it, and that one was shot down, unfortunately. Two tragic losses that happened in a very close proximity to each other that actually caused Malaysia Airlines to go out of business. It was renationalized at the end of 2014, so they basically went belly up from that. Due to this crash or the disappearance of Flight 370, new aviation standards were enacted, such as better ways to report position over the ocean, longer recording time for the cockpit recorders, and better ways of getting flight data out of the airplane, maybe wirelessly or something, recording it to satellites or something, so that if they can't find the physical recorder. So this was a pretty big deal back in the time, and that's the very, very basic bare bones narrative. Each piece of that you could go on and on forever, but I don't really think it's necessary at this point. We'll get into that a little bit further when we start talking about our conspiracies. But just to touch on a couple of possible problems, there is some evidence that the aircraft may have had some sort of electrical system failure, but it appears that the electrical system or the transponder was turned off manually, so that suggests human interaction. That's kind of weird. Another possibility is that the cabin lost pressure and everybody passed out, which could explain the erratic flight path and how they kind of just flew into the middle of the ocean where they would have probably ran out of fuel. There's, of course, I mentioned already the captain. There's a little bit of weird stuff on his flight simulator, and some people have suggested that his marriage was falling apart, so maybe he committed suicide, but there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. And lastly, the cargo hold did have lithium batteries, and also it possibly had some cargo that was mislabeled, and people think it might have been some sort of top secret cargo, but either one is highly dubious unless we have the physical evidence of the airplane to prove that that's actually what happened. All right, so that's pretty much all I have. Who wants to go first with their theory? How about you, Agent ETA? You want to start us off here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like you were talking about before, that there's so many different small, minute details you can go into with this case. I mean, it's literally almost never ending. I've heard so many different things. Just for example, The plane was 11 years old when this event happened, and as far as Malaysian Airlines was concerned, like the documentation that they presented, the plane had never had any history of failures or problems. It had pretty much as clean of a record as you could have. Now the plane was 11 years old, so was that a case of the plane just being well built and holding up that amount of time, or did they maintain the plane well enough? You know what I mean? And that's why it had no record of accidents or failures.
That's 11 years is a pretty young for an airplane. They generally will run them much, much longer than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense to me then. If technical failures may or may not have something to do with it, as far as something just randomly failing on the airplane. But okay, so the theory that I like to entertain sometimes, the one that I picked is the theory that the U.S. military actually shot down the plane. So if you look at the trajectory that is the most widely accepted trajectory of the plane, where it heads south into the Indian Ocean, it's heading somewhat towards the atoll of Diego Garcia, which is an island group with a military base on it, with a United States military base on it. So one of the ideas, one of the theories is that the plane was actually hijacked, and before the plane had even taken off, it had been basically rigged to like recreate a flight pattern, to fake a flight pattern. So instead of initially going north and heading on its original flight pattern, the plane headed north for sure for a little bit, but then headed at least east and then southeast and then south eventually towards the middle of the Indian Ocean, which is where that United States base is. It's if you look at it on a map, it's pretty much like almost smack dab right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So, I mean, if the plane did follow its accepted flight path, then it should not have been able to reach those islands. I think that's pretty well established. But if the flight plan was, someone was able to fake it somehow, then who knows what kind of weaponry they could load on the plane beforehand. Obviously all this work would have to be done on the ground before the plane even took off, I would think, for sure. But you do have those two Iranian citizens that had, fake passports. I mean, that's, to me, it's a little bit of a red flag. There's not too much you can draw from that as far as, conclusive evidence, but a little bit of red flag, kind of like, it's odd, but it's one of the theories I kind of like entertaining, just because, what the hell was that plane heading towards? And when I look at it, there's nothing else in the middle of the Indian Ocean, really. That's the only like target that could have been focused on anywhere in the area. Yeah. So, yeah. So yeah, that's the theory that I brought up here.
Yeah, that's one of the major ones. I'll pipe in with a real quick theory here. So one of, I don't know if it's a major theory, but it's often mentioned, is that the plane was somehow abducted by aliens. Drum roll, please, right? And this is a pretty short one because I'm just going to go ahead and say, nope. Yeah, it wasn't aliens, guys. All right. All right. Did you have anything, Agent Orange, that you wanted to talk about?
No.
Oh, so you're basically just a spectator on this episode.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pitch in every once in a while. It's like I don't have any conspiracy theories that I really researched on this one. I think it's mass murder, and that's really all I have to say about that.
So you're going with the pilot did it. You think that he committed
the pilot
suicide?
Totally did it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
What do you think the angle was on that? Do you think he was having a tough time in his marriage, or do you think like maybe he had some financial debts that?
It's hard to know. It could be any of those things. It could be just dissatisfied with his job and was just over it. Maybe the flight attendant made him angry. Who knows? Who knows? It's really hard to get in the mind of someone like that would be willing to do that. But it just, everything leads me to believe that that's what happened, unfortunately.
Well, it's not totally improbable. It's happened before in aviation history.
It's definitely happened before. Yeah. It's happened at least 3 times within the last decade. So it's not unheard of. And it just seems more likely just with the way the plane, the change trajectory, how There was the people saying, and I don't necessarily know if this is true or not, how he flew over his hometown kind of as like a one last goodbye, as
Uh-huh.
when he changed trajectory,
Well, he
and then
supposedly like,
just
kind of dipped towards it a little bit, right? And then
yeah,
veered
like
back
where you
off.
could see it out of the cockpit window, so they
Yeah.
say. I mean, I don't know. Um,
So long, farewell, Avidas, and goodbye.
that just seems like the most likely thing to have happened.
Mhm.
Well, and that definitely makes sense to me too, in a way. But then I look at some of the information that's kind of that's within that MH370 safety investigation report that they released. They actually did some observations of both, the captain and the co-pilot, and they looked at, any known history with like apathy, anxiety, or irritability, and they didn't see that with Zahari. He actually had a really good ability to handle stress at work and from home, or deal with stress at home. They looked at the same with Farik. He was dealing with a rapid he was dealing with a kind of rapid increase in fleet promotion, because I guess it was in like 3 years. It took him only 3 years to become a professional pilot there, and then
Yeah.
and then
And just to make clear who we're talking about, there are two pilots, just for the listeners. The head pilot was a 53-year-old gentleman. He was the captain, Zahir Ahmed Shah, right? And then the co-pilot was a 27-year-old individual. He was a first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid.
and I believe that was his first flight as well.
Yeah, well, and
Sitting in the co-pilot seat.
The captain had worked for Malaysian Airlines since 1981, I think, or something like that, because he had joined that airline as a cadet and then trained with them and earned his commercial pilot's license through that.
And he was
that
well
airline.
respected.
Yeah. I mean, if you've been working that damn long for the same airlines and gained an air of respect amongst your peers, I mean, you got to have a certain level of consistency. I mean, I've heard certain recordings like of planes that were going down in legitimate situations, and the pilots knew that there's probably 0.001% that they get out of this alive. Obviously, you're at the front of the vehicle, and you're also heading towards whatever you're heading towards. How calm some of these pilots are when you hear these recordings seconds before they know that they're about to crash. Some of these people really do have high level training and high level, situational awareness and a calmness to them as well. Because, I mean, to wield one of these giant pieces of machinery, in my opinion, I mean, you either got to be real dumb and not know the risks involved, or you have to be pretty intelligent and also fully understand the risks involved and take them into account, and accept them as well. Yeah, obviously you have to accept them, but.
I would go with the latter, and they're giving psych evals constantly, every few months or so, and physicals and all that to make sure that they're still competent enough to fly a plane. But they always say, like, even with like office shooters and stuff that end up going on rampages or taking out people, they always say, like, he's the last person I would expect to do that. So just because he's logical and he can think straight, he's been a pilot there for 30 some odd years, that doesn't mean that he's not capable of snapping.
That's true enough. Yeah. I agree with that. So everybody has their point of break that they could reach. You know what I mean? And also that might also support some of the kind of erratic behavior involved in this case, because if you do have somebody who's just snapped or broke mentally, then their behavior isn't necessarily going to be rational. You know what I mean? It's not going to make sense to the average individual, most likely, or either it will or it won't. I don't know, but that could be a distinct possibility, I think.
Well, yeah, and I mean, but it's just strange though still to consider, like, okay, so they look at both these guys, they seem pretty sturdy and mentally to deal with that type of work pressure. They look at
the captain was.
Well, yeah, and then they look at the same was with Farik as well. I mean, they didn't see any noticeable behavioral issues that it was going on for him. At least what I read in the investigation report that they released.
I think it's less likely to be the co-pilot than it is the pilot.
Yeah, and then they look.
He's a millennial though, isn't he? Like 27 years old.
That is true. You never know.
Right? I don't know, man.
Goddamn millennials.
And then they
I didn't say it.
there was no suspicious
Anderson
activity
did.
regarding their financial records as well. And then they actually went back and looked at CCTV recordings at Kuala Lumpur airport to just kind of see to look at both pilots' their behavior over time to see if there was anything
When they
different.
checked in and-
Yeah, they were just trying to see if they were doing anything differently over prior to that actual flight, and they said they didn't notice anything significant that would warrant any concern in their investigation. So, but again, I do. Yeah, it doesn't mean that no one can snap. Of course, I'm just wondering, like, what's the? I mean, I guess the biggest mystery to me is why did it take such a path? Like, if a person was intent on killing themselves and the rest of the people on their plane, why did they, take off once they reached the South China Sea, do a U-turn, go to Penang, which was, Zahari's hometown, then head out to the Andaman Sea, and then from there, it's kind of up in the air as far as what occurred. It just kind of started flying around for a while before, okay, boom, it crashed. Or, it's...
Before it got shot down by the U.S. military because
Yeah.
the 2 Iranian passengers that had fake passports really are the ones that hijacked it. And before, they took off, they put, some kind of electronic device to fool the navigation system to make, a fake flight plan, you know what I mean? Or something.
Yeah, there's that. Or, the pilot took off, maintained his course until he could depressurize the cabin, make sure everybody was out, and then turn.
Or they actually flew north.
Yeah.
Or they flew north
That's
to Mars.
But
It's a Mars?
Yeah.
But there was obviously something deliberate going on because, the transponder was, turned off.
Then you turn the transponder
Yeah, so there was
off,
something. There was a plan, but that's the thing, just to think. Okay, so how would assuming one of them did it, that means they would have to deal with the other person unless they were in on it, which doesn't seem plausible. Then the next thing to do, of course, is take it to such an elevation where they can depressurize the cabin and then just deprive everybody of oxygen until they die, and then now they have full control. You know what I mean? Assuming they have an oxygen tank available, which I'm sure they do. Yeah.
Yeah, the pilots have separate ones. Then it's a completely separate system than the passengers as well. So.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a very malicious kind of approach to killing yourself if you're going to snap all of a sudden. And you're like, oh, I'm going to take over 200 people with me. I'm doing it.
Man,
it's just
crazy do what crazy do.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I can't assume to know someone's state of mind, especially when something like that happens. But yeah.
I mean, how long do you have to fly before you start resenting your passengers and your flight crew and all that kind of stuff? So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Oh, these little urchins knocking on my door asking for those plastic wings all day. I can't take it anymore.
can't do it. All these tiny little booze bottles. You know what? What am I supposed to do with that?
So I was just going to say one little interesting piece that a lot of people talk about is if it had crashed into the ocean, when a plane crashes, even on the surface of the water, which has a surface tension, it's like crashing on concrete almost. It would have broken up into thousands of little pieces, and those pieces, some of them would have floated around, and they would have washed ashore, they would have gone places, they would have been found. They searched so much of this area, they would have found something floating around, but they didn't find any of these pieces. So this kind of leads into, I think, what Agent Locke's going to talk about, or the plane would have had to crash basically vertically, like nose directly down, which almost, that doesn't really happen. I got one theory this is one of the ones that I was most excited about because it seemed like slightly plausible and kind of interesting, is that there were 4 passengers on the airplane that worked for a company called Freescale Semiconductor. And these 4 people were partial patent holders of patent number 8671381, and the 5th patent holder was Freescale Semiconductor itself. Now, the theory goes that this patent is worth a couple $2 billion, and the company had these people murdered, or in other words, they crashed the plane or hired somebody to crash the plane in whatever way you want to, however they did it, to murder these 4 people, so then the patent would pass on to the company. So they murdered them for a couple $2 billion, which is a really good theory, and it's actually kind of plausible because people have been murdered for far, far less than a couple $2 billion, right? So it kind of makes sense. And there are people out there who would bring down a plane for a couple $2 billion. Let's not kid ourselves. But when I started looking into it, I've heard of it, but I never really looked into it that much. It turns out that, yes, this patent does list 4 people and Freescale Semiconductor as the patent holders, but the way these things usually work is that the company that hires the employees, they put the employees' names on the patent, but Freescale actually owns that patent. And I found a post on Reddit from a patent lawyer who was saying that because the patent says this, I think like the original patent holder or whatever, there's a certain language used that indicates that Freescale owned the patent outright before the crash. So that in and of itself pretty much diffuses this theory. But if you want to diffuse it even more, you could say that those people may not have even been on the plane because the names don't match exactly. But that could just be because they're Chinese names, and when they translate them to English, they don't match up exactly. Who knows for sure? You could probably bother their families to find out, I suppose. But also, the patent itself was not really, it's not a patent that was worth probably billions of dollars. It was a much smaller patent about something about fitting chips onto a board or something like that. Something that wouldn't really break up the industry to the degree to where it'd be worth that much. So the more you look at it, the more it doesn't really hold up. But I really like this one because the rest of the theory I didn't mention yet was that BlackRock and the Rothschilds were involved, and I think we've talked about BlackRock before on this show, and probably the Rothschilds too. But
Sure.
when you say those, that kind of perks my ears up when you're like, oh, well, who owns Freescale Semiconductor? None other than BlackRock and
Oh man, it makes my asshole twitch.
Yeah, every good conspiracy have the Rothschilds involved. So,
Oh, 100%.
Hey, Agent Orange, don't you try to be a fucking Rothschild freaking agent and discredit what we're doing? All right.
Yeah.
What are you,
Don't do that, Agent.
What are you trying to do? Are you trying to set up people's freaking subconscious?
no, I'm serious.
Wait a
Every
minute.
good conspiracy
I thought I
theory
knew you.
involves the Rothschilds. They're everywhere. They're pretty much the Illuminati. So I'm agreeing with you, for Christ's sake.
Oh, you're backtracking now. You're backtracking is what you're saying.
I'm one
now.
of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to hook me up with some of those sweet-ass Rothschilds gigs, dude.
Yeah, I'm
hey.
the poor black sheep one.
I will sell out right now if you want to drip me down some of that sweet Rothschilds money, dude. They can have this show. I don't even care.
I would turn you all in for cash. I just want you to know that.
I appreciate that, Agent Orange. Anyways, to finish this one off, it turns out that BlackRock is only one of many institutional investors, and they don't actually own the entire part of the company, just a chunk of it. A pretty large chunk, but not even in the entire company. So pretty much the more you look at it, it completely falls apart. Unfortunately, I really like this one, but it just doesn't hold up. All right, so does anybody else have any theories they'd want to discuss on this one? Wasn't there a cell phone somewhere in this narrative that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like the sound of that. I know where you're headed with
Well,
that.
I want to hear about the cell phone part of the theory. That's what I'm interested
Agent
in.
Locke, are there any orifices within somebody's body they might be able to hold a small cell phone, perhaps? Some individuals might be able to hold the largest of cell phones.
No, there was a theory out there that someone actually sent out a message and it had like metadata that showed their coordinates near Diego Garcia, and they said that they were being, they were all being taken,
I heard about that.
I forget most of it, but it was just kind of like, yeah, he shoved it, up his rectum to conceal it from the military officials.
But I heard something similar about like coordinates being sent out to that specific location. But
yeah, but when you take it was an iPhone. It was supposedly sent from an iPhone, and given we're all familiar with iPhones. I forget the specific model that they mentioned that it was, but it's a good 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches in width. So to abruptly shove it up one's rectum would be that would prove difficult. I mean, especially in a
Look, I've seen X-rays of people keystering like bowling pins. So
yeah,
I'm willing to bet that if you go on Pornhub or whatever right now and Google iPhone and the bum, you will get a result.
Hey, what? Have you guys never
as a
heard of
matter of
Mr.
fact,
Hands?
it's called iPhoning, and I'm very much aware of it.
They have a high quality camera on that phone.
Yeah.
You guys are disgusting.
But I mean, but also too, I mean, I don't know how much credibility you can add to that, because metadata for like image content can be it's easily to manipulate and mess with that. So how and there's plenty of little apps you can download online that can allow you to take photos, and then you can completely alter all the metadata to make it look like it came from somewhere that it did not. So, but that was a fun theory out there, but that wasn't my main one. But just there's a lot of interesting stuff surrounding this, so who knows? I mean, it probably is plausible that murder suicide, but just why would you take that long to kill yourself and to kill all those people?
Because maybe you don't know exactly what to do.
If the other agents don't mind, I want
all you know is you want to kill yourself, right?
I like to touch on something that Agent Anderson.
Shut up, Agent Orange.
No, I will not. I like to touch on something that Agent Anderson
I'm sorry, did I say that
earlier about how if you crash into the ocean, it'll leave all the debris. There'd be much more debris to be found. That's assuming that you went into like a death dive, which, like if you run out of fuel, the plane is going to start listing, but any pilot could pull themselves out of that. You could glide easily another 37 miles without fuel and crash into the ocean without, like destroying the entire plane. I guarantee out there's large sections of that plane still intact. I think that the pilot, and I'm pretty sure that the ATSB, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, they all agree that the pilot was in full control of the plane up until it crashed, I think. And not to mention that the debris found showed that the flaps were down as if it was landing, and like 100%, like I can't remember, but I think the pilot landed the plane in the middle of the ocean. I don't think he wanted the plane found. I think he wanted this to be a giant mystery, and that's the way it is. But I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a guy.
There is some controversy about the wing debris that they found. The story
flaperon?
goes that that wing had been damaged and replaced previously. So the theory goes that the debris found was actually from the wing that had been removed, not the new one that had been replaced on there. And there is some science to back this up, because the type of water that those were found in and that it would have had to travel through to get where it was going, it had a certain type of barnacle growth that would not have been possible in those temperatures and in the water where it was. So it does appear that those wing debris were actually farmed from somewhere else. Perhaps they were placed in water for a few months before they were placed on the beach and then quote unquote discovered. But I'm not a scientist, so I can't really evaluate barnacle growth and that kind of stuff. But there does appear to be some legitimate evidence that some of this debris was fake and was planted. And that's kind of interesting in and of itself.
Well, no, just let me intersect here real quick, because that was one of the elements I was also going to elaborate on, because me personally, just if I were to, throw my thought, just my opinion is those debris pieces, even though they claim in their investigation that, there was, several that like they confirmed are part of that plane, and many others were almost certain to be a part of that plane. I think it was all planted. I think this plane did not crash. I think it was commandeered, flow somewhere to some type of secret base, and then that plane is now being, retrofitted to carry a nuclear bomb that will eventually, pilot again over, an American city to pave a kind of new chapter in the, new world order.
Sort of like a false flag attack. And there is evidence to back it up, because it does appear that debris was planted. And again, if it crashed at going at anywhere near a reasonable speed, even if they did crash it in so-called landing pattern or whatever, it would still be in 1,000 little pieces. These things go almost the speed of sound. And if it hit the water going that fast...
If it crashed in the middle of the Indian Ocean, though, I mean, the Indian Ocean is an extremely vast area. I mean, there's all sorts of hiding pockets and stuff and places that any of the debris could have settled without the human eyes.
Not to mention, it's one of the roughest. That area is one of the roughest seas, in the ocean.
It's very unpredictable. The main currents are well established, but the weather certainly isn't. I mean, it's a very unpredictable area, you know.
Mhm.
Well, there were two cyclones during that time as well that happened around that time. So that could, like, I don't know how long it took for them to find the pieces of the plane. I think wasn't it like a year afterward?
Yeah, the first piece of the plane was found in 2015. Let me look it up in my notes again. It's got to scroll up slightly. Yeah, in July 29, 2015, according to what I could find, is when they found the first pieces of debris.
Now, it could have washed on shore during the cyclone, and that would signify like why there wasn't barnacles on the piece itself. If there was a cyclone, the winds were strong, the current was strong, there wouldn't be enough time for the barnacles to attach themselves to the wing, and that's why it was found. It would take a lot of work to bring in the old wing and just like place it on the beach somewhere.
Not really. I mean, you put it on a boat, you drop it off, done. That's not a lot of work at all.
I guess.
That's easy peasy. I mean, you could just fly it over in a cargo plane and just dump it out in the water somewhere. Like it would take almost no work at all.
There are many illusionists that work behind the scenes.
Yeah, David
on a
Blaine.
day-to-day
David
basis.
Blaine's my main. He's my main suspect in this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, he does use a lot of editing in his tricks, All right. Well, that's pretty much all we have on the theories. There's really no end. I mean, it just goes on and on. You could find as many theories as you want on this. There's some we haven't touched on, such as some sort of electronic hijacking, or like somebody hacked the computer system remotely. We touched on a terrorist attack a little bit, but didn't really elaborate. But that's one of the possible ones. One of the ones is that North Korea hijacked it for their own nefarious purposes. And I think they have done that in the past once or twice before. So it's plausible, I guess. I don't know. There's a phantom cell phone theory. We didn't really talk too much about the possible fire aboard the plane, but that's another one. It could have possibly been shot down. There's somebody I think on a news channel, I forget who, said that it might have been sucked up by some kind of black hole. I'm not making that up. And it just gets weirder and weirder the more you look into it. But when you get right down to it, there's a little bit of evidence, but we really don't know what happened, what caused this thing to crash, and where it ended up. Although I think, personally, if I had to pick a theory, the most plausible one would be that the pilot was involved somehow, because somebody did switch off that transponder manually, and that's highly, highly suspicious. You don't switch those things off ever under any circumstance unless you absolutely have to, because that's a safety measure. The transponder, I don't think we said what it does. The transponder announces your position to other airplanes and other towers. So that's basically a beacon saying, here I am. And the reason for that, obviously, is so you don't crash into other airplanes. So you wouldn't switch that off ever unless you were planning to crash the airplane anyways and you didn't want to be detected where you were going. But as Agent Locke mentioned, if you're going to crash the airplane, why would you switch that off? You would just crash the airplane. You wouldn't go through all this nonsense. You would just crash the dang thing. So I think we mentioned also the hypoxia event briefly, that if they lost cabin pressure, they could have knocked everybody out, and then the airplane would have just kept going until it ran out of fuel. That's another one I think we mentioned. But
that one's popular because then you wouldn't have a bunch of people there to stop what you're doing once they realize what you're doing.
yeah, but again,
but someone would still have been in control because the plane made several deviations before it eventually disappeared. So someone would have had to maintain control at some point.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, I think the most plausible one is probably the pilot was up to no good. What do you guys think is the most plausible theory on this one?
I mean, you know where I stand, but I think we'll never know, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Agent Orange always stands with mass murder.
Yeah. That's his bag. All right. Well,
now I'm on a list.
He's also known as Agent Monsanto also.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time for a show that we haven't really decided on yet. You can follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod, and we have an email address, alienconpod@protonmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can really help us out by leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts.